Yep, we are now live.
Yeah.
Fight for independence. Oh, today, open fields can be heard, beaming with life and hope for the days to come. Celebrating life given to liberate our country from oppression and hate. A tired day, day to lessen the memory, soul, sweat, blood, and tears shed for the peace of reign in the land. And no, it wasn't in vain. The people sing, let the people dance, let the drums play, let the sound be loud, let the birds sing, it cannot be heard. A cry for peace to heal this land. Oh, heal this land. The struggle of a young nation, a vision raised by the late Dr. John Garang. Fallen heroes, healers, in South Sudan home. We cannot let that go. We cannot stand and watch. Cannot go stand in the grave. Day to lessen the memory, soul, sweat, blood, and tears shed for the peace of reign in the land. And no, it wasn't in vain. Let the people sing, let the people dance, let the drums play, let the sound be loud, let the birds sing. What cannot be heard? A cry for peace to heal this land. Oh, heal this land. Africa Wild Book stands with a vision to educate, empower, and cement a peaceful foundation, encouraging veterans to share memoirs, pen to paper, to have a culture of reading, research, and debates, learning from the past to forge a future. Let our children grow up in peace. Let our families know no war. Let us celebrate our martyr day in the independence and freedom that we now have.
There is history and culture between the covers of a book.
Dr.
You'll
Lens
find what
just
has
pulled up, but
been
I
and
think it's
what
coming
could
back.
come each time that we look. Elders, raise your pens and take a stand. Your ink brings life to South Sudan. If you'll make your mark for those to come, our generations all can join as one. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth. There are tears from the eyes of our nation. We fear for you. Information is lost when oral culture is what we choose. But Africa World Books knows that we must take a stand. That only history leads us and liberates South Sudan. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth. Encourage the aging generation who fought for South Sudan to write their memoirs so the youth will all understand that our nation is young, but our history's richer than gold. That our people are strong and our stories are worth being told. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth.
Uncle Atim, can start the program. Thank you.
Yeah. I hope, how many people have come?
They will join. So we have more than 18 now, and they will continue to join. So most of them are coming out of the churches, and yeah, it's going up. The numbers are increasing. Yeah,
it's all right. Yeah. I think you should. It's with me here this evening, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We welcome you to this show, which is a chat between me, Dr. Lam Akol, on one of the books he has co-authored, and as usual, if you attended the last chat I had with Dr. Francis Deng on his book, The Invisible Village, this conversation is following the same line. Most of you, especially the younger generation, have missed out from studying and knowing the history of our motherland, South Sudan. History of South Sudan and history of Sudan are linked together, and it's almost difficult to separate them until maybe you would be talking about history of South Sudan maybe after 2011, but the rest has been one for most of the more than a century. And it's the common knowledge that everybody must know their past, whether from a family level or from a country. You need to know where you came from and where you are today. And you miss out not because of your choice, but because of circumstances, especially the last war, which sent many of our people to refuge in neighboring countries and beyond. And what happened has been that the host country, where you are a refugee or a resident or a citizen, you have to study that, which is natural, because there be no room for you to say, well, this is not the history of my country. Maybe for somebody doing research, you would say, I would like to study the history of South Sudan or Sudan generally. So we have books written about the history of South Sudan in form of history books, in form of memoirs, in form of political tracts, and so on. And we are not actually picking history books as such. That one would be your own responsibility. And probably this starting point will lead you, oh, where do I get further information on this matter? The topic we are discussing, this is the latest book by Dr. Lam Akol. He has written several before, and why we chose this, we will, time allowing, we will have a chat with him in the future on some of the other books. But this book is particularly important. It's what they call, the book is called The Genesis and Anya Nya in South Sudan, by Professor Stores McCall and Dr. Lam Akol. Almost every South Sudanese, I'm sure, knows about Anya Nya. I mean, even if it started before one had been born, you must have heard people talking about it. You don't talk even about the SPLM without reference to Anya Nya, because these are supposed to be a continuation of that movement. And some of you must have heard from, or must have read some books on the subject, or must have heard some of your friends and family members talking about Anya Nya. Probably a member of your family might have been an Anya Nya member, or a senior officer, just an ordinary fighter, or at the home providing Anya Nya with support like food, cattle, for feeding them. So it's not a very strange body, this Anya Nya thing. And we want to ask one of the authors about the subject itself. There are so many versions. So many people say this and this, and Anya Nya did this, or how it began. Of course, it originated, the first shot was fired in Torit on August 18th, 1955, just a few months before Sudan became independent on January 1st, 1956. And the importance of this book is that there have been several books written about Anya Nya, but not comprehensive enough to cover most of the things you would like to know. You would get some information in the memoirs of General Joseph Lagu, who was one time the leader of Anya Nya, but it is not as comprehensive in terms of Anya Nya as this. It is about his life and what he did. It has also made use of available resources. I mean, the published documents from archives. They also use interviews with the participants, those who took part in the Anya Nya, and the information is there. And that makes this book unique, in my opinion. There have been people who wrote a long time ago, like Alex Bali, who was one time an MP in Juba, in the regional government, I mean, People's Regional Assembly, the Nile Terrate, talking about those days when Khartoum reacted violently to punish South Sudanese who were either active in Anya Nya or suspected to be supporting Anya Nya. There have been books, we will get over them later. So, welcome. And if you have been reading information about Dr. Lam Akol, as is shown there, maybe he has been prevented by modesty not to talk about other aspects of his life you may not know, and which, as somebody who has been a colleague of his for several years, there are things I would add. As a student, he said he developed interest in politics when he was a student. And this is true. When we were undergraduates at the University of Khartoum in the early 70s, he was one of the active students in and fighting for the freedom of academic freedom, where universities should have the right for academic research. Nobody should, the government should have very little to do with what goes on in a university in terms of students can hold rallies, discuss national issues, things which are philosophical, whatever. And there should be no interference. By the time we were there, we had this government, the May regime, which was one-party system, military-based, and it was not very comfortable with democratic principles and practices. So they were trying to take over the university and control it, bringing in people who were sympathetic with it rather than people who were qualified to hold positions. And this was resisted by students. Of course, like in any situation, there could be, you have students supporting that. So Lam was one of the advocates of the freedom, academic freedom, freedom of speech, especially within the campus and over the whole country. And this was very, very clear, especially before the Addis Ababa Agreement in 1972. There were groups, there were ideological groups, the Muslim Brothers, loyal to the ideology of Islam, as expanded by their leader Trabi. And then we had communists, we had those who were followers of the political parties which had been dissolved by May, and a few affiliated to the what they call Sudan Socialist Union, which was the only ruling party. We toned down later when the Addis Ababa Agreement was signed and the regional government was established in South Sudan. It was known by many of us that this was not the best solution the people of South Sudan wanted, but it was better than nothing. And we were a bit reserved with the opposition from the students, especially the Muslim brothers and the communists and others who were opposed to the regime mainly because of the agreement. So at least there was some sort of ambivalence about that. So Lam was one of the people who advocated that thing, freedom of expression, freedom of academic freedom. And then the SSU came in with, they tried to have members among the students. And they did it in a very clumsy way. It was not really conviction about the ideology. There were some sort of bribe. They came with money. And Lam was one of the people opposed to that sort of thing. The argument was that you had to accept an ideology as a way, at the best mode of running the country, but not because you are paid. You are paid money. So he was one of the students saying, it's okay, you run the country with your system, but we can't endorse it here. And then we had another member, and there was a time we were almost threatened with arrest in Malakal. There was a student conference. I think it was in Wow, for the students to define their role in society. Of course, not as an opposition group. And some of our colleagues decided to get involved with the government authorities to organize the student meeting. And Lam said no. If the government is doing it, then it's no longer a student organization. And I was one of the people following the same line. And I think in Malakal we were threatened with arrest. But somebody, I think Peter Garquaz was a very sensible man. He was the governor, the commissioner, and we were not arrested. And then the other point, which he has not mentioned, what they call bureaucracy is almost a science. How you run a system, it's not an easy thing. There are levels. This is why you have the civil service, and then the Civil Service Act, where the country is run. And this defines the role of every institution and individuals. For example, the army has nothing to do with politics, the police, and so on. So what I noticed, he didn't work in the civil service. It was a luxury. It was like an academic. And my colleagues who were in Juba, working in different government departments, we were introduced to that system, and we were conversant with it. Now, when we went to the bush, unfortunately, the majority of the leadership of the SPLM was anti-bureaucracy. When you said, oh, things should be done this way and this way, no, orders. And I was surprised that he was one of the people who had never had the opportunity to be inducted into the civil service system, who knew it. The only person I remember, I'm not going to to denounce people, but I mean, this is my experience. The only colleague of his in the leadership of the SPLM who was very conversant with the civil service mode was Kwal Manyang, who was one time working with what they call MTC, which was like what they call TEF in Australia here. So these were part of the things he did not include. Maybe he's not aware about their importance. And then he speaks several languages very fluently. Nuer, Dinka, his mother tongue Shilluk, and then English, Arabic, and German, and some French.
No French. No.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah. So that's my additional information about what he didn't include in his who he is. Yeah. Yeah. Any comment?
You mean from me?
No, not I mean from the listeners. Yeah.
Not yet. I think we thanks our viewers for sharing the program and continue to share. We have almost 80 people now watching, and yeah, so I think you can continue with the program. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Now, what we are going to spend our time on now is the book. As I said before, you have seen the title of the book, and it is, to me, when I read it, I was so happy. The best book actually is the one either telling you the new things you didn't know, or confirming or elaborating on what you had some hazy information about. The first part is about the mutiny, the Torit mutiny, which took place on August 18th, 1955. They have done a very marvelous job. People talk about, okay, there was a mutiny. How did it happen? What course did it take? Who were involved? They have done a good job in the sense that they have used sources. One of the most credible sources is the inquiry, the report. Of course, after the mutiny, the government set up a committee to investigate the causes. What was the cause of the mutiny? And the head of the chairperson of the commission was a lawyer, a Palestinian Christian called Kotran. And a lot of people believe that he tried his best not to be biased. And much of the report is quoted there. The ringleaders. Now, I would put a question to Dr. Lam. Now, there was what happened. The final thing which happened on that morning, 18th of August, 1955, was a culmination of so many things going wrong in South Sudan. One of them was the steps towards the independence from Britain and Egypt. They were, as they were preparing to leave the country so that the Sudanese could take over, certain steps were taken. One of these was the all-party conference, which was to prepare the way for independence. And South Sudanese were not included. The northern parties went to Egypt without South Sudanese, on the assumption that they had no parties, or which was not true. And what they agreed there was not in favor of the South. This was one point which was against the South. Then they started, just like people who had just killed an animal, distributing the meat. The British were leaving. They were leaving, and their jobs, they had a lot of jobs, 800 jobs, very senior ones, in the civil service, in the army, everywhere. Now, these jobs were going to be left to the Sudanese. Out of these jobs, out of 800 people talk about 4 or 6 went to the south, and they were not even very important ones. So there was a feeling of, I mean, in terms of population, the south was 1/3 of the country in population and size. So why that sort of, is that the justice in that? Then came the situation in Western Equatoria. The Egyptians were trying to influence things there, and they were buying chiefs and all these sort of things. And then there was this Ansara textile complex where so many people had been employed. So there were problems, some sort of labor problem. So these people went on a strike, or they demonstrated. Instead of taking it as a normal, I mean, such a situation, when it is very serious, it is the police to be sent, maybe to disperse them. But instead, they send the army to shoot people, and people were shot dead, were killed. And before that, there was an MP representing the area, Elia Kuze. This person was in the area, and they arrested him because he was not agreeing with some of the things happening. And in the state of, this was a member of parliament, in the state of taking immunity from him and then to be taken to a court like in Juba, he was tried before the tribal chiefs, all these things. Now, things were going, and the army was following these things. Then, on that material day, they were supposed to go to Khartoum. They were being sent to Khartoum. And they were actually told that they would not be carrying their guns and all this and munition. So they started wondering what is happening. And according to the book, and which was also part of the information, there were some political parties. There was the Southern political party, and probably they must have been influenced here in one way or another. And one of the officers, called Sefronino Boenya, had tried to shoot a northern officer, police, army man. And that led to the search of his house, where the documents were found which implicated them that there were some politicians involved with this. So that's a very, in brief, these are some of the reasons which angered the soldiers there. And Dr. Lam will give you more about that thing. Now, in summary, could you tell the leaders, I mean, the viewers, more about this story? And after that, could you answer who were really that you have enumerated 3 bodies suspected to have played a role? The Egyptians, because the Azari government, which had promised to unite Egypt with Sudan after independence, felt that Azari had betrayed them, abandoned that program for Sudan to become independent of both Britain and Egypt. And then possibly he has suggested that some British senior officials who had wanted to, possibly if there were chaos, that would delay their departure. And then they would say, let us come and stabilize the South, and let us stay for a while. And then the third possibility, of course, they are saying these are possibilities, or were possibilities in the mind of the mutineers, that Southern politicians, they may be thinking of UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence, especially after the chaos. Now, can you enlighten the viewers on all these possibilities. Of course, there were those problems, but what really triggered the mutiny? What did they achieve? Because this thing did not happen in Wau, which was the capital of Barzal. It did not happen in Upper Nile, because there was also the question of, it looks like they didn't have very good coordination. Could you enlighten the viewers about all these difficulties of why it happened in Equatoria? Because in Equatoria, after the outbreak of violence in Torit, it happened in all the several towns in Equatoria where northerners were killed. Upper Nile, there was some attempt, but it didn't amount to fighting. The same in Barzal. Could you enlighten them further?
Okay, thank you very much, Comrade Tem, for these questions. But before I answer, I should seize this opportunity to thank our brother Peter Deng, because really he has tried very hard under the difficult conditions of being far from home to establish this African well books, as a publishing institution that had helped a lot in some books seeing light of day and becoming available for many readers. So I thank him very much for that. I want also to greet our listeners, those who are listening, and give them a congratulation in advance for the coming anniversary of our independence. That will be about 6 days from now. We can celebrate it in any way we want. What is important is to mark the occasion, because this has a connection with what we are talking about. To come to the question, you even has helped me to answer some of the parts that I was going to delve into. The Torit mutiny is a culmination of many, many grievances that have accumulated within the body of Southern politics at that time. And you have mentioned some. The real issue was that the British, who for a long time had administered South Sudan separately, decided after the war that the Sudan should become one country. You remember the 1922 Closed Districts Act and how South Sudan was closed to the north, that people who want to go there must have visas in order to go to the south, and so on. There were certain measures taken to counter the influence, the Islamic influence of the north over the southern tribes. That was the declared intention. This policy that has been going on without specification was formalized in 1930 with what became known as the Southern Policy. From that time on, the administration of South Sudan had really, for all practical purposes, has been separate from Khartoum. Even the conference, the British or the condominium rule used to have yearly conferences for the administrators, who were all British. The Egyptians were only occupying the position of Mamour, who is a junior government government officer these days in the local government system. So they used to have conferences annually in Khartoum, but our governors in Juba, in the south, used to go to the governors' conference of East Africa in Nairobi or Kampala or wherever it is held in the old British East African protectorate. So what is important is to have it in mind that at that time, South was a little bit detached from the North. So after the war, when the British decided that the country should become one, of course, under pressure from the northern intellectuals that were emerging at that time, this Great West Congress, and from it actually, from it came the political parties of the North, the independent group and the unionist group. So under pressure from those groups, and also the Egyptians who were the second party in ruling the Sudan, the British yielded, and then they decided to take that decision. And the Juba Conference actually was organized to inform the South Sudanese. It is not, as some of the historians go, that it was a conference for the Southerners to decide where to go. No, it wasn't. It was a conference to tell the Southern representatives that were invited by the British. In fact, most of them were chiefs and a few clerks, who went there. Though they were told very clearly that, it has been decided that the country will be united. And what we want to discuss now is your status within that united Sudan. And James Robertson himself, who shared the conference, wrote in his memoir called The Transition in Africa. He wrote that the only decision taken in that conference was his, that the country will be united. So as a result of the Juba Conference, the Southerners called for what they call safeguards. Okay, if we are going to be part of the North is advanced, the North has a definite orientation, Islamic Arabic orientation, and all that. They have been running, or they have been part of the system. So we need safeguards that will allow us to be protected, at least from a superior elder brother. So those safeguards were granted, and they were to be part of the powers of the Governor General, who was British anyway at that time. And now the result of Juba Conference also was for the Southerners to participate in the Legislative Council that was being proposed at that time, and which took place in 1948. So the Northerners began to distance themselves from these safeguards. They said, well, we are one country, there is no reason for part of the country to have special rights. This sounds like veto. So they started, working against those safeguards. Now, the nail that killed that safeguard was what happened in Cairo, which Atem has mentioned, the Cairo conference in February 1953. You know that the new revolutionary group that took power in Egypt were the first to accept that Sudan can have self-determination. The king has always assumed that Sudan is part of Egypt, and nobody should discuss that Sudan can become independent. For them, that is a non-starter. And even actually the prime minister said, any person who wants to detach Sudan from Egypt is like somebody who have cut my arm out of my body. So that was a feeling in Egypt at that time. So when the new group came up, the free officers, they accepted the principle of self-determination for the Sudan. And of course, as I said before, the Great West Congress, they were divided into two groups. The group that were calling for immediate independence, and there's a group that were calling for association with Egypt. under the Egyptian crown. That was actually the terminology. So at least on a literal basis, there was no crown to be under after the crown was overthrown, you see. But it's still the association with Egypt was still there. So the self-determination was to determine whether Sudan should become independent or should have an association with Egypt. And Southerners were not represented. One of the reasons, which was mentioned also by Tim, was that they said they had no political parties. But actually, there were Southerners within the northern parties. I remember, one of our best educated people at that time, Bulan Alier Didio, who graduated from Makerere. He was a member of the National Unionist Party. So why did they not take him, and to take part in that conference? So the throwing away of safeguards. Then you know that in 1951 there was a party that was formed, which was called the Southern Party, and the elections that were done in 1953-54, of course, they went into election under that name, and actually partly as a reaction to the claim that the Southerners didn't have political parties. So then afterwards, the debates in Parliament about the rights of Southerners to be protected, and the clear understanding from the North that there is nothing like that, the country is one, and so on. And then later on came the Sudanization, which also a term mentioned, the question of taking positions from the British and giving them to the Sudanese. This is why it is called Sudanization. And in that Sudanization, the South got 4 senior positions and 2 junior positions, which were 6 in all out of almost 800. And of course, Southerners saw it as a way of cheating them. If you are talking of logic, you could argue on logical terms that at that time, really, there were in Southerners who were educated enough. To fill many of the positions. There were no Southerners who were senior enough to take some of those positions, because these were the senior positions actually. But maybe at that time they might not have had what is called affirmative action or positive discrimination, because yes, on a strictly civil service rules, you can say first hire, first served. But you could have done that, as we did later on also in Sudan afterwards. There were special consideration for Southern Sudanese in certain places, even in the university, by the way. As I told you before, we on the 10 joined the same year. We had people coming from East Africa, to join the University of Khartoum. They were asked to satisfy the minimum requirements, not the competitive requirement, because there are 2 different things. Even when we were in the preliminary year, Joseph Garang, who was the Minister of Southern Affairs, agreed with the Vice Chancellor of the University of Khartoum at that time that we need professionals to help the South. And therefore, if possible, Southerners should not be subjected to competition to the professional faculties. It should be enough that they have satisfied the minimum requirement for joining a particular faculty. This is why we had a big number of people joining engineering, medicines, agriculture, veterinary, and the rest. They were not competing overall. Otherwise, we would have got 2 or 3 in each year. So this is what we are saying should have been done at that time. You cannot strictly say because the Southerners were junior, they should remain junior. You should have used the principle of affirmative action. And now came also the issue of of celebrating the independence. And this, I think, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Yes, there has been a lot of talk that politicians were involved, Egyptians. The issue of the Egyptians need to be explained. The Egyptians, who of course were counting very much on the NUP, the National Unionist Party, to get their hope to have the Sudanese vote for an association with Egypt. And the NUP, for their bad luck or for their good luck, were by then the majority party in parliament. They had an overall majority. That was the first and the last time in the history of Sudan that one party could have an overall majority in parliament. So there can be no excuse as to why they could not deliver a policy objective that they had adopted earlier. Now, as a result of the internal politics within the sectarian parties, as you know, there were two Sayyids. There was Abdurrahman, who is the Sayyid of the Ansar, and Ali Margan, who was the Sayyid of the Khatmiya. So those people were becoming uneasy with Hazari, and they wanted to replace him. They began to discuss the possibility of forming a coalition government. Now, Azhari, being a very cunning guy, what he did is to widen the gap between the two, because he knows that Abdurrahman al-Mahdi is very passionate about the independence of Sudan, as opposed to Ali Margan, who was with him, actually, was with Azhari on the call to have an association with Egypt. So because of that, he went and used the independence card as a way of mobilizing the MPs of the Umar party who would have voted together with the NUP to take him out of power. So he survived because of using the independent card. So he changed, he made an 80-degree turn from calling to associate with Egypt and to calling for an independent Sudan. And that is how he survived the vote of no confidence, and that is how he provoked the anger of Egypt. So Egypt started courting people they thought could flout this new line of Azhari. And since they knew that there was discontent among the Southerners, they were giving promises that they can help the South. So that is one of the things that led some of these military people to believe that if they do anything, they may find support. Another misleading conception also, and it is covered in the book, Southerners somehow believed that the British will be on their side. This was like a gospel belief with them. Even at the time when the Governor General cut short his holiday and he came asking them to surrender, they even thought that the British in the rifles in East Africa can come and support the rebellion. So they were counting on things that were not realistic. The biggest problem, of course, with the Taurid mutiny is that there has never been political coordination. There were no political coordination between the military people and the southern politicians who were unhappy at that time about what was going on, and that what made it easy to lose track. And it was also, it was also made to happen sooner than they thought, because Now, as I said at the beginning, this the straw that broke the camel's back was the decision to transport them to Khartoum, under the pretext that they are going to have the celebration for independence, and the Southern the Southern Corps, the Equatorial Corps, actually that was the name, should be part of it. And so they had a time limit. Either they do it before the day they are, actually, in fact, the day they did it, where already the cars were coming to take them, to Juba, and from Juba to Khartoum. So that prompted the quick action. But if there were a political, orientation and political awareness of what needed to be done, the action could not have died that fast. The Sakarliro and the rest of the people could not have done what they did if they had the political education enough to sustain what was a mutiny. They could not have also committed the atrocities of killing innocent northern civilians, because that will count back on somebody who wants to have a revolution. Again, also another factor may be because the only officer who was involved, Tafeng had been arrested in Juba, a few days before the Tuareg mutiny. He went to look for some logistics, and the people in Juba there kept him. They had information, of course, or some kind of leads that there was something happening, and it is likely to be that he was the ringleader. The rest were NCOs, and in the army, it is not belittling the NCOs, but they have their role. Their role is not to be at the planning stage. They are at the execution stage. So the long and short of it is that the mutiny took place as a result of accumulated grievances among Southerners. They had no proper coordination between the military and the politician. It had to happen quicker than they thought, and therefore there was a disconnect between the various parties. You will even read in the book the question of communication, how communication really helped in destroying that movement. If it was something like this time, or even before that, many things would have happened in a way that would have been favorable than they did happen. The communication was a big problem, and people in Equatoria alone, let alone Wau and Malakal, could not get information quick enough for them to be able to adjust their plans. And one can also say that, in fact, the Tuareg mutiny was brought down completely. By October 1955, it was over. And this is why there's a debate. Even at the end of the book, I raised that question: Is Tuareg the precursor of the Anya Nya, or was it a national action that inspired people to think of improving what had happened? Was it a precursor, or was it an independent occasion? Because many people will say, "Oh, the 17 years war, that is from 55 to 72." But that one is, well, people can talk about it, but I'm just mentioning it that militarily, by October, the Tuareg mutiny has been brought down. It was no longer there. Individual one or two people continued on the mountains until 63 came, when the Anya Nya was formed, and they joined Anya Nya. Later on, Tafeng, of course, was released when he was imprisoned in Port Sudan, and he came back to play the role we all know that he played in the the Anya Nya movement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we move to the next, there have been comments from viewers like Adola Luongkang, Michael Gale, Juma Kenyatta, Michael Alaire, asking, say, for example, the question of Jonglei Canal, will it be dark? Somebody asking about what about the Upper Nile, the impact of that on Upper Nile region and all this and so on. Please, I'm appealing to you, just like what I did before with, they shared with Dr. Francis Deng. This is mainly about the book. Those issues, current affairs, I mean, some of us have views about those things, but specifically it is about the book. And please, I'm appealing to you, especially you young people. This is more important in the sense of informing you, or it's public education. Opinion has very little value. If I say I'm for it or I'm against it, it doesn't help. But this one is informing you about what happened. And if there is something which is not clear, ask within the context of this book. And this is the reason why we are doing this. One of the viewers has even asked why is Dr. Lam concerned with history or with these things and not with mathematics. I think please let us respect one another. You have the right really to have an opinion, but please, this is not the place for it. Listen, and if there is something which is not clear, then you ask. And I'm sure that anybody has been touched by Anya Nya in one way or another. A relative has been one of them, killed while fighting for South Sudan, and so on. And even those days, I remember people used to contribute money to be sent to Congo so that they could go and buy those guns from the Simba. And these were the guns which were used for the War of Liberation. It is part of what later on became the SPLM. I mean, continuation, because people felt, okay, this one did not succeed. Can we do it the other way around? So please be patient. And also, let us respect one another. There's no reason to hurt feelings of somebody. If you don't like what is being said, please bear with us. We felt that this is a very useful thing for nearly everyone. And you are entitled to ask, I'm not clear about this. Why did this thing happen? And what about, and so on. Like this Anya Nya thing, as Dr. Lam has said, some of us believe that, or it was from August 18th, 1955 up to 1972. There was a gap. The mutiny collapsed. And later on, people said there were few people within Equatoria in the hills waiting until the time when Canada was reorganized again in 1963. These are things, these are gaps we need to fill. What happened? What was happening during those years when there was no Anya Nya? Or how did Anya Nya come about? These are the things we need. Please, I appeal to you, listen and wait until you ask a question related to what we are discussing rather than, I mean, when we are not bringing these things in, it is not that we are not interested. It is something affecting our country, but it should be in a different forum, under a different title, not the books. Do I make sense? Please, let us move forward. Anybody with a question, I will welcome that, as long as it is about what we are discussing. Any question? So we presume that we agree. You agree with my suggestion that we concentrate on the book. Yeah. Okay. Somebody has even supported me by saying and blocking. That's right. Okay. Now, after that lull or something, people went into some sort of hibernation or nothing was happening. We had the formation of Anya Nya. It is it is believed that the formation of Anya Nya had to do with a letter. Well, that's Dr. Nam will elaborate better. That letter, that was a letter written by South Sudanese who was probably in Uganda or at the border, called Marco Ruma. And he was one of the active people during those days, even during the mutiny of 1955, saying that something would happen just before the independence of Uganda. That was around 1962. And for those who were young enough not to know or had not been born, that letter is credited with instigating the strikes of student strikes of 1962, where many students, the schools were closed. We went to the countryside after the schools were closed. Of course, people created excuses. I remember when we were in Atar, we were saying, "Oh, the food was bad. The northern teachers were mistreating us." This was not true. This was a lie. It was an excuse. So we went back. We went to our homes, and by the time the strike was over, when we came back, some of the older boys had not come back, had not returned. I remember during our time, there were people like Abel Tonayi. He was in third year with those of Peter Adwok. He didn't come back. He had gone to the bush. And the same with other students, a lot of them. And in Rumbek Secondary School, there were people like Emmanuel Abour and others. They went to the bush and got trained. And there were, luckily enough, they say when problems of other people sometimes can be, Lam could put it better in Arabic. Masala what? Problems of somebody could be a blessing to others. What I mean, when these students were going out, they didn't have guns except the policemen who defected. But there was this problem in the Congo where the Simbas had surrendered and they were selling their arms at the border between Congo and South Sudan. So those guns became the source of armament for the people who had just gone to the bush. Now, could you elaborate on this who were really behind this? Were there politicians, apart from this famous letter? Was there homework going on behind the scene? You have hinted those things in the book, but did it just arise out of a vacuum, or there have been some underground work by southern politicians? By that time, the military was in power in Khartoum, and there were no political parties active. Am I clear? Are you getting me? Yes, yeah, that's somebody has mentioned that. I was talking about
It is
the
actually
problem.
cutting. I don't know whether there's a problem on my side or it's general.
Yeah,
Okay?
I'm not sure whether you are getting me. Uh-huh. Yeah, Peter, are you listening?
Yes, you are clear. I think Dr. Lam uh, has technical issue. Yeah, it's coming back.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, but it was cutting. I missed some of the things you said.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking about the what they
Mm.
call
I
the
remember
problem.
when you said about some of the senior students did not come back in Attack.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where I picked
Mm-hmm.
the last.
Yes. Yeah. So
Yes.
I said there was also what the misfortunes of the Congo, which I said there
Mhm.
is a good way of summing it up in Arabic. Masalan what? Masaib al.
Masai Pomin in the Pomin for Waidu.
Exactly. Exactly. I wish you can translate into English as.
Yeah, that problems of some people can be good news for others.
Exactly. So,
Mm.
so in that context, the Congo rebels, called Simbas. For those of you who know Kiswahili, Simba is a lion. So these were the people pro Lumumba who were fighting against the central government in the Congo. And after they were defeated, they had got a lot of their guns from probably Eastern world, from the Soviet Union of the day. Now, after their defeat, they ran towards the border with Sudan, or South Sudan rather. And these guns were being sold. And the country people, South Sudanese, were collecting money from the villages. And the money was taken to the Congo to buy these guns. And they came back to fight. But most of the original guns of those people who took up arms in 1963 were mostly policemen. And from the talk of Lam later, prominent commanders of Anya Nya in Upper Nile, in Barghazal and Equatoria were former policemen. People like Darlin Shogo, Paula Well, and others were policemen. But the students who went without guns went and got them from the Congo. So the formation of Anya Nya, can you enlighten the viewers about how it began and the difficulties they face, and the political party, I mean the political aspects of Anya Nya? Cut again. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, we are cut again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking about after the formation of the armed wing or the struggle, there was the political aspect, because there were politicians who had fled the country to the neighboring countries, Uganda and Congo, and formed political organizations and the military here. Could you elaborate on the relationship between the political groups, those of between the political groups? Mm-hmm. Am I clear?
You said that I elaborate on the relationship. It is
Yeah,
stopped at
yeah.
relationship between.
The armed group, those people who were carrying weapons, Nyanya, and then political leadership. People like Agri Jardine, people like Joseph Odo, William Teng, and others, Gordon Motat.
Mm.
Yeah, and the difficulties they face.
You see, that is a good question, because not many people look at it from there, from the beginning. You see, those people who have joined, as we said, the Anya Nya later on began to develop after the events in Congo, which happened in 1961. And then afterwards, there were really no centralized command. Each group will spring up in their location. They will want to arm themselves the way they see, and so on. And as I mentioned, people collect money to go and buy guns. The other people were mostly politicians and a few administrators. In fact, William Deng was in Capoeira. He was an inspector there. Those of Uduhu and the rest were in parliament. And they were, when Abud dissolved parliament in 1958, after his coup, then they became normal citizens. And they stayed in the country. But then when Abud adopted the extreme politics of hunting down the politicians, then they began now to see the danger to their lives. In fact, those of Uduhu, a big number of them, they sneak out of the country at Christmas Eve, and then they went to Uganda and eventually settled in Congo at that time. They started to work politics, anti-regime in Sudan, but they did not contemplate an armed struggle. For a while, this is what they followed. And this, by the way, explains a little why in 1964, when the Abud regime was overthrown, William Deng opted to go back to the country. I'm not underrating the differences they had within the Anya Nya, but the background, the mentality of the politician at that time was to mount as a peaceful opposition against the regime, try to win over the African countries on their side to do the pressure. The turning point came when Abud now decided to unleash, terror on these politicians. And in fact, the first meeting about the Anya Nya was chaired by Uduhu. By that time, Father Saturnino was the patron. He was not in the meeting when the name Anya Nya was adopted. So that was at a later stage. But up to this time, it's still the Anya Nya was operating as independent groups. The groups in Upper Nile, the groups in Bahr el Ghazal, even in Equatoria, the group in Western Equatoria was also distinct, did not in fact join the rest until the time when Lago began his contact with the Israelis. So the connection was not very strong, but there were politicians in each region who were working hard. I remember in Ethiopia, there were those of Philippidak Lieth, and those of the late David Gwok, who was administrator, who died last year. Huh? Yeah.
David,
And then Malek Fajongdi too was, although from Bahr el Ghazal, but he was mostly active in Addis, at that time. So the connection came very slow. The connection between the politicians and the Anya Nya came slow. Although, by the way, the local groups of Anya Nya were somehow connected with the politicians, very clearly connected with the politicians, and more strongly with the Southern Front, when in 1964, when the Aboud regime was overthrown and the Southern Front came up as the only political party in the country, they were the ones that were organizing the contracts with the Anya Nya, the collection of the money, and passing information and the rest of it. So later on, of course, when the various governments were being formed, this is mentioned in the book. There were so many, governments: the Nile government, the Anyedi government, the Safuk, and whatever. All these politicians tried to reach to the soldiers to control them. I think the most extensive work done by a politician in the Anya Nya was the one done by Isboni Mondiri. Isboni Mondiri actually toured many parts of what is today Equatoria and what was Equatoria and Bahr el Ghazal in an attempt to unite the people of his area. It was mainly the difference in the Moroland that led to the failure of the mission of Isboni Mondiri to unite the Anya Nya groups that were around. So there was connection, although it was local at the beginning, but later on it took a bigger shape through the various governments that were being formed until Lago came. When Lago came in 1970-71, and now united the rest, united all the Anya Nya forces under him. Now you began to have a central command. He appointed Emmanuel Abour in Bahr el Ghazal, Bujon in Western Equatoria, Oteo in Upper Nile, and so on. And now each of these were organized to units falling under the overall authority of the South Sudan Liberation Movement, stroke Anya Nya.
Yeah, thank you. Somebody help us with David Koch and
David Koch, yeah.
And then somebody, Peter Panchol, said he has got very useful information. He has read a book by Scopus Pogo. And
the
I
Arabs
think
and the one in Southern Sudan. Yeah,
it's a good book, and I recommend it to other people who have not read it. It's very important. Yeah, that's it. That's very important. The link between the military and the Anya Nya fighters. Yeah, the question after that, is there anybody who would like to ask a question so that Lam could answer him? Or do we proceed with the narrative? Because after the formation of Anya Nya, as he has told you, the formation in various the regions which are now the main southern region, Bahr el Ghazal, Upper Nile, Equatoria, and he has elaborated. The book has talked a lot about the formation of Anya Nya all over the south. We have in Upper Nile 4 Pauls who were in charge: Paul Awell, Paul Ruot, Paul Adong, and Paul who?
Paul Nyingori.
Exactly. And the same with the other region.
It's actually Paul Ruot. Paul Ruot and Paul Nyingori. Paul Ruot was the senior.
Yeah. And then
he was a graduate of Juba Commercial.
Yeah, imagine. And so these Anya Nya, Yes, very, very interesting point there. He said, they have said in the book that while the government, I mean, they were moving around the, say, we wouldn't call them liberated areas, but they had the ability to move because the rural population were sympathetic with them, providing them with food and other and money for buying weapons from the Congo. And then during the dry season, where the mobility of Anya Nya was restricted, I mean, it was very risky, the government would come. So he was saying, they are saying in the book, were they paying taxes to the government during the dry season and then to Anya Nya during the rainy season? I don't know. It differed from region to region. I think there were Anya Nya you would slip in even during the dry season to get there because they had agents everywhere, including the cities. Their agents used to be called scouts. I think these were the intelligence officers who even some of them went as far as government controlled cities and all this. So can you talk about people under two governments in quotes, government based in Khartoum still having control over the people, and Anya Nya other coming during the rainy season, but even during the dry season they could also have contact with the people. Very, very precarious sort of relationship. Yeah. Could you talk about that sort of relationship where you have two rivalry or contending powers over the control of the civil population? During the dry season, the government would take control of the rural areas. And then during the rainy season, where the government, because of impossibilities of the roads, the Anya Nya would be the one moving freely. Did you get my question? The line.
Yeah, I got it. Although it cuts, but I got it. I got the question.
Yeah.
You know that as you said, it depends on the area concerned. You cannot have a uniform assessment of all this, and in fact, this is the predicament of the civil population in contested areas. The areas that are purely under Anya Nya, there's no question as to who is the government. And the areas that are purely in the hands of the government, also, they pay taxes to the government, although willing people who are supporters of the Anya Nya will collect money and give them to the Anya Nya. But this is more or less applying on the gray areas, which is still under contention. And as you know, the Anya Nya was not like the SPLA. The SPLA from the beginning, actually by 1984, the SPLA was already controlling the countryside.
Yeah.
And it was roaming there freely. This was not the case in the Anya Nya. In fact, they even tell me, that at the rainy season, when the dry season comes, they go to the torch and wait until the rain comes. And then they will act. One of them will be moving in the grass and then ask the other one, "Can you see me?" And then the other one is say, "Yes, I see you." They say, "Okay, still we have to stay more until the time comes when the answer will be that I can't see you in the grass." Then they will now start going to the areas close to the enemy. You see.
Yeah.
So this thing about the taxes are in these areas, and there were many. There were many such areas where Anya Nya comes the next minute The other minute, the government soldiers come.
Yeah.
But of course, what is unique? Or what was good for them is that government taxes, are uniform in the sense that they are done once. You see, they are done once. So if once they come, you know that they will not come again until next year. When you have the next cycle of taxes. But the Anya Nya needs are all the time. Actually, it's never called tax, and it was in Equatoria mostly where they were seen like taxes. But in Upper Nile and Bahr el Ghazal, they were seen as contributions. You see, that we want help from the population. There are times, of course, when they use some kind of coercive action, like, for example, when they see bulls or bullocks around, which they need, they can just tell the people that we want to take this for our ration and so on. So yes, we talked about double taxation, but it is mainly applicable to the areas where there were contention between the Anya Nya and the government. And there were many, in fact, unlike later on. There were more than the areas that are settled either side.
Yeah. Anybody with a question? Viewers, you must participate. This is for you. Of course, I mean, you have not read the book, but there have been the stories you heard about Anya Nya during those days. Probably you could ask, maybe it is covered in the book there. Yeah. What's it? Yeah, we'll come to Karakol. We will come to the question of Addis Ababa Agreement in 1972. We'll come to that later. We are approaching it right now. Yeah. Now the impact of Anya Nya, although they were not really a threat to the government of Sudan in terms of military defeat and so on, there was a problem. Sudan had a bad name abroad, fighting people and mistreating the civil population, especially those suspected to be supporting Anya Nya. So that leads us to the October Revolution of 1964, which toppled the military government. There are stages we have skipped, like the leadership in Anya Nya had also power struggle. There were also assassinations within the leaders of Anya Nya, like Daniel Shogo was assassinated in Upper Nile. He was one of the prominent commanders, but he was killed. These are some of the things you will get in the book later. But since we are limited by time, we will be skipping some of these things over and move to the October Revolution, 1964. This was actually a revolution because it was the masses of the people who went to the street to demanding the end of the military rule. Even Northern Sudanese, of course, they were unhappy with the dictatorship. And also, some didn't like the fact that the military was using force in the south, forcing Islamization, and then also imposing Arabic on the southern people of Southern Sudan. And so, after the fall of the military, and everybody believed that, or it was widely believed, that it was because of the problem of the Southern Sudan, which led to the fall of the military. The transitional government, headed by Sir Khatima Khalifa, said the solution should be there should be a political solution to the problem. And then the holding of the Roundtable Conference took place in early 1965. And with that, of course, part of those people who came from abroad, from exile, those of Agri Jaden did not agree. He told them, "You cannot negotiate. There is no time. There is no time in history where a slave negotiated with a master. It's either we will get our independence or this is a waste of time." And he walked out. Those who remain hammered out what they call the Roundtable Conference recommendations, which did not amount to independence or even federal system, but some sort of a strong regional autonomy. And soon after that, very critical development happened. They were talking of people going for election for the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly was the one to come and develop make the constitution for the country. And the northern parties had just come up again with their old game of denying the South their rights. And the holding of election was taken to the Majoriciada, what they call the Supreme Council, which was acting as the head of state. And this was made up of 5 members, 4 of them from the north and 1 from the south. Now the council voted whether the election should be held or should not be held because of insecurity in the south. You will get it in the book there that the 4 northerners were divided. 2 were against the holding of the election and 2 were for holding of the election. And then the southern representative, who was Luja Duok, cast the vote that the election should be held in the north, because in the south it could not be held. So these people went for election in the north and elected their government. And that government in the end turned out to be for a military solution. That decision has been criticized, that at least this brought in a government which really reversed the whole situation almost to square one. Can you comment on that? And I'm sure you and your co-author have agreed that that decision was later regretted. Instead of if they had ruled out the holding of the election, because soon after the election they went on the rampage, the killing in Juba, in Wow, and all over the south.
You cut again.
It's very unfortunate.
Hello?
Yes. Yeah. The decision by the region, the Supreme Council. Yeah. 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 Are you hearing me?
sing with life and hope for the days to come, celebrating life given to liberate our country from oppression and hate. A tired day, a day to lessen the memory, so sweat, blood, and tears shed for the peace to reign in our land. And no, it wasn't in vain. Let the people sing, let the people dance, let the drums play, let the sound be loud, let the birds sing what cannot be heard. Cry for peace to heal this land. Oh, heal this land.
Can you appeal to Jacob Akol to hold on? He seems he has been frustrated by this cut.
Yeah, the network is bad over there. Yeah.
Yeah, so can you appeal
The
to him?
struggle of a young nation, a vision raised by the late Dr. John Garang, fallen heroes, he lost to make South Sudan home. We cannot let that go. We cannot stand and watch. No, cannot go back to war. Not anymore. Not go back to war. We're not stand back and war. We cannot let our heroes stand in the grave. Take a lesson of memory, so sweat, blood, and tears shed for the peace to reign in the land. And no, it wasn't in vain.
Yes.
Peter,
Yep.
can you present my request to Jacob Akol? Because he was one of the people, he was involved with Anya Nya, especially with their publications, the Grass Curtain and other things. He was Jedhammer, they're one of the Jedhammer at the time. So he should also come and help us with filling the gaps. And he seems to have gone because he was he's frustrated, like the rest of us, by these cuts. So can you appeal to him to join us and even make an input?
Yeah, DBOS, we apologize for any inconvenience. You know that there are technical issues and internet problems. If you want to join, I have shared the links, so follow that links. And Honorable Jacob Akol, you can also join direct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So if he's on the line, then I would like to have a word with him.
Yeah, I've shared the link, so.
Yeah, Jacob.
No, he hasn't joined.
Yeah, it's okay. He will get us later on. Yeah.
Actually, he was there. He wanted to leave. So the thing to say is that he should not leave.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, okay. Now, since we will be running out of time, could you? I was really impressed by some of the stories, which I think should be shared. I mean, like this assassination. I mean, this Philip Nanga, the commander in Lakes at the time, who later on was sentenced to death for whatever problem. And later on, when their headquarters was attacked by the government, and they escaped during the attack. And later on, when the attacking forces had withdrawn, they went back instead of leaving for good, not to return, because he had already been sentenced to death. And then, when he was asked why he had to come back for sudden death, waiting for him, he said, well, this is my government, and how would like to...
Uncle Atem, let me just interfere. Dr. Lams, I think he got technical issues, so he has dropped off.
I see.
Yeah, I think the best thing is to reschedule till we get a better time, internet. Yeah, he came back. He's back. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know. What do we... Where did we stop? Where did we...
You talked about the government, the formation of the government, the election, and so on.
Yeah, the 65 in 65.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like what made it possible for the National Unionist Party and the Umma Party coalition to come to power without the South was the result of that decision holding partial election. And you have commented that this is what the later Southerners went to regret. Well, I think it must have been done. The story circulating at the time was that it was presumed that if there were no elections in the South and the elections were run in the North, then that was a de facto separation. Does that make sense? That the assumption was that if the elections were held in the North and no elections in the South, the North unwittingly agreed that the two countries were no longer one. Something like that. Does that make sense? Or, I mean, that current story. Yeah.
Well, okay. In fact, if that was the story, it should have been the Northerners who will say that the election must be carried all over the country, because they're the one who don't want independence. In fact, the Southern Front was very clear about those elections. As you know, the transitional government was very sympathetic to the resolution of the problem, a peaceful solution of the problem, and that's why they held a roundtable conference. They invited a number of African countries to be observers. You know, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Egypt, Algeria. About 7 of them were there as observers during the roundtable conference.
Yeah.
And you will remember that the delegations were formed in such a way that you had 9 from the north and 9 from the south. And the northern delegation was 1, and they were always having 1 position in the talks. The southern delegation has a problem regarding the representation of SANO, because by then William Dane has come inside, and he was using the same name. And after a lot of mediation from the Southern Front and the other Southerners, they were able to agree, because they were actually given 5 and the Southern Front 4. They were able to agree that, okay, let the SANO outside take 5, and then, take 3, and then SANO of William Dane takes 2. Again, the Northerners brought up the issue of other point of view. And then again, there was a struggle. In any case, the struggle with the Northern parties started right from the town table conference. Yeah. And then they were not happy with the way that the discussions were going. And that is why they abruptly brought an end to the conference, under the pretext that they needed to go for elections. And the PDP was against, which is the People's Democratic Party, was against election and others. So now, when they went to the Supreme Council, because the Supreme Council was formed right from day one, when the Council of Ministers was formed under Cyril Katim, they also formed the Supreme Council because they are taking from the government that were there before the coup. Yeah. And Luigi Adog represented the Southern Front. In fact, the member of Supreme Council, the 3 ministers, were all from Southern Front. Now, the position of the Southern Front was to boycott the election, actually not to allow the election to take place. And that's why it was a disappointment when Luigi voted. You know, I think he was the one who chaired the meeting, because this sharing is by rotation. So when the voting took place, it was a tie, 2-2, and then he cast the casting vote. It was not a vote for election in the north only. It was for the whole country. And in fact, he went and contested. He went and contested in Shuluk North, where he got elected and came. But then the Southern Front dismissed him. They dismissed him from the party for indiscipline, for having. But then the damage has been done. The damage that you had election carried out, and it brought a government that was really, really anti-South. The government of Mahjoub, as we remember. It was a government that did the Juba massacre, the Wow massacre, and massacres in individual towns, you know, which were not well publicized because those ones were too heavy. In Juba, it were in thousands. In Wow, it was 76 in one night, you know. So the damage was done as a result of that vote. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can go back a little. Somebody has come up with the question of what were the difficulties facing Anya Nya. One of them, I think, you have handled there is the disunity among the politicians, where they had governments in exile, one after another. And you try to explain why these differences were there. There's also another important point which you mentioned, and you should elaborate. The question of they were anti-communism. That they said they were against colonialism, imperialism, and communism. At the time when the world was divided between the West and the Soviet bloc, if you were unhappy there and you joined the other group, and that you even mentioned that it was one of the problems facing Isbona Monderi. Can you talk more about that? One of the difficulties facing Anya Nya, that they didn't have an ideological direction. Again, problem of cut off again. Did you get my last question?
I didn't. Actually, it is coming with the cuttings.
Yeah. It's a question of somebody almost asking some of the problems facing Anya Nya.
Okay.
Yeah, and I added the question of ideology, that one of the enemies they considered was communism. And when Isboni Mandiri got some support from China, he was condemned for that. Mm-hmm. It's difficult. Yeah.
It's having technical issues.
Mm-hmm.
Let the people sing, let the people dance, let the drums play, let the sound be loud, let the birds sing what cannot be heard. A cry for peace to heal this land. Oh, heal this land.
Africa Wild Book stands with a vision to educate, empower, and cement a peaceful foundation, encouraging veterans to share memoirs, pen to paper, to have a culture of reading, research, and debates, learning from the past to forge a future. Let our children grow up in peace. Let our families know no war. Let us celebrate our martyr day in the independence and freedom.
Yeah, thanks. Welcome back.
Yeah, I think you were talking about the challenges, yeah?
Yeah, and one of them was and you have pointed out that the rejection of the political leaders of Eastern or the socialist bloc as alternative. They seem to have been wedded to the idea of that the West would be the one to help them.
That's right, especially the Christians.
Yeah.
Where the influence of people like Saturnino, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When Isboni Mundiri suggested that, in fact, there were ovations. There were ovations from the Chinese, you know, trying to do something.
Yeah.
You remember within the Cold War, there was also another Cold War between China and Russia. You remember?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know? So, and they have seen the usefulness of the Chinese guns from the one they buy from the Simba. So Isboni Mondiri suggested that, and in fact that was one of the reasons why he became hated, you know, and he was later arrested, accused of being a communist. See? Yeah, that was one of the things that I highlighted in the book. That was a real big error of judgment which they made at that time, relying on hoping that the West will do something. And again, it goes back to what I said about the mentality of the mutineers in Torit. Somehow, they thought that the British will come to their aid. I don't know why, but if anything, the British were more pro-North, you know, than South. In fact, there were a few administrators in the South who were committed to having a separate South, those of Owen and the rest. But they were a minority, you know. Their seniors overruled them. But then, so that is one of the biggest problems, the question of ideology. How do we make use of the political contradictions, the global contradictions that were taking place at that time? That was actually made the beauty of the struggle. You remember the Simba, by the way, they were being armed by Sudan and Algeria and Egypt, and the guns were being ferried through Juba. And ironically, these are the guns now that fell into the hands of the Anya Nya. Now it is because of ideology that Arabs can now support a rebel movement in Congo. You see, so Anya Nya thought somehow that they can do things without orientation, clear orientation, or orientation towards the West. That was a big mistake. The second thing, of course, is the question of localism. The localism, despite the fact that later on there were governments that were made, if you follow the composition of those governments, there were always compromises between the three provinces. You get some people from that province and others from another province, and then you say you have formed a government of South Sudan. But you see the fault line as very clear in the actual practice that that is. Lago, on the other hand, he used extreme, measures by telling commanders that anybody who wants to get arms must support him. So since everybody wanted to fight, they all came under his leadership. So the unity was still fragile when the talks for that is about, and that's why again there were also friction as the talks progressed. Even the entire delegation was changed. The delegation that negotiated the Addis Ababa agreement, when Lago was going for ratification, the whole delegation was thrown out, and he came with new people, hoping to renegotiate the agreement. And of course, the ruling is in relation to the army, and that the agreement has said that the army in the south will be made up of southerners and northerners. But he was able to make it
It's 1810.
10. Cut again.
It is still there, but I think there is an issue. It's internet.
It's 1810.
Imagine knowing cycles of the sun and the moon and stars, or how the clouds stay up. Imagine running with a cheetah fast, knowing what it hunts or its rival cats. What if you went back in time with kings and queens of when our land was wild? You'll never know of this and more if you don't pick up that book. This African stories and African tales make you the wiser, it's all yours to gain. Knowledge is power, can change everything. Read African stories, see what you could be. Imagine going to the core of the earth, rising with lava through the vents, and you never get burnt. Taking the heat of the Sahara on the camels and the sand dunes with the snakes and the flashing floods. What if there's more to technology and you're the genius holding its next key? Just know you're free, or to begin if you just open the book. This African stories and African tales make you the wiser, it's all yours to gain. Knowledge is power, can change everything. Read African stories, see what you could be. Africa Wild Books is doing the most, publishing for you and bringing them close. Build up the library right there at home. Let your children read and imagine it all. Did you know that your mind is the biggest weapon you have? Just a word at a time, and the world will know who you are. Did you know that your mind is the biggest weapon you have? Just a word at a time, From Africa to Australia, a book at a time for everyone. A culture, a history, a heritage. Gotta read, yeah, read these books with African stories and African tales. Making you wiser, it's all yours to gain. Knowledge is power, can change everything. Read African stories, see why you could be. Africa Wild Books is doing the most, publishing for you and bringing them close. Build up the library right there at home. Let your children read and imagine it all.
Thank you. Welcome back, Dictor.
Because that's been a challenge, yeah.
That's
It is.
we apologize
Yeah.
for the inconvenience.
Yeah. So most of the questions from the viewers has been about these problems of. You are reading from Johnson.
There's somebody talking about that. Was it because the leader came from Equatoria?
Yeah.
Is that in front of you there?
That's right.
Eh?
Yeah, I've seen the question.
Yeah, but actually the leader has always been from Equatoria, whether it is whatever republic or it is the only one that was tried by Gordon Motat did not last long. Yeah. So I'm answering that gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
The leaders of all these groups have always been in Equatoria, except the Nile Republic that was, the one that was tried by Gordon Motat
from Baragazal.
But it didn't last long.
Yeah. Yeah. It's another Victor Makur.
Eh?
Yeah. It's another follow-up Victor Makur.
Okay, what does he say?
Why did Gordon Motat denounce the Anya Nya one peace agreement of Addis Ababa 1972 and decided to go to exile in UK?
Yeah, he thought the agreement did not satisfy the original demand of independence.
Yeah.
That was his reason. He was not alone. There were others, those of Mayar, Golong, and all this. But as I said, the neighboring countries didn't want anybody who was opposing the agreement. So they either relocate or keep quiet.
Yeah.
And this is why Motat relocated to London.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I hope your answers, the answers given asking the viewers, are you satisfied? Do we move to more questions? The issue of the please, this water of the Nile is not covered in the book. Please.
I'm very much concerned about it.
Yeah.
Well, if they want another forum, then
that's right.
For that, but not this one.
The other question, which is a bit out of the context, is that I read some of the quotes or quotations which I had a lot of reservation about. Like, there is a story of Atara Deba was attacked or something like that by Anya Nya.
That was attacked by Daniel Chuogo,
and then they're talking about 300 rifles.
No, 300 is high.
Yeah, it's true.
There should have been 30 here.
Even the number of policemen there could not exceed even 5. No, but
they sometimes have some guns in the store.
I see.
Yeah, but it's not 300. No. If it is written like that, then it is a printing mistake.
Yeah. And then we're talking about when Daniel Chuogo went to Nuer land, especially the area of Angat. And then I think he had clashes with the local militia there, the pro-government militia. And it's reported that about this cost something, the lives of 3,000 civilians, which I feel is too much. It might have not been the case.
Well, actually, this is what the fighters say. It was a big. It was a punitive campaign from Chogo.
Yeah.
Chogo was in Tunja area when the news came that his camp was attacked, and almost 11 of his officers were killed. Almost all the officers except one or two actually who ran away together with William Nguyen. William Nguyen came, is actually the one who came and warned them about the impending attack from the militias at that time. So when he came back, he was a bitter man. You see? And there were really many people killed, but the figure was given by the officers. Not, I don't know whether it can be proven. No.
Yeah. David and Denga Mol, I will come back to you later. As I want to pursue some questions. Then the assassination of Daniel Chogo, was it had it anything to do with his leadership style, or what was the problem? I mean, and the accused seemed to have been David Bolapiek, who was executed later.
No, actually, it's the other way around. In fact, it is the execution of Bolapiek that caused the killing of Daniel Chogo.
Exactly.
Yeah, because those people who killed him, one of them actually is from his village, the guy called Kalakon. It is because of that attack when the officers were killed, the 11 officers were killed by the Nuer militia. All right? So the guy who went to tell Daniel Chogo that there was a coup attempt by Bolapiek, and that is why the people were not in a state of combat readiness. That was the story. So Bolapiek was arrested, and then a committee was formed in the way it is written, chaired by Ayay Montoi. Yeah, he was the chairperson of the committee, or the court martial. And then those implicated with him included the two NCOs. They were given strokes.
Latch.
Yeah, they were
latch.
They were latched. Yeah, they were latched. Yeah. They were bitter about that. So one of them, which is Kalakon, is the one who ran to Wechi. And this loose way of us, the army at that time. You have somebody who is a soldier and he stays with you, and you are in a military unit without asking what did he come for and where is the departure order and all that. So he stayed with them until conditions worked in his favor, that Daniel Chogo came to Didigo for the marriage of his friend, Anthony Kur. You see? So they learned about it, and he had left most of the force at Canal, that they will follow the next day. And that is now where he went to. For him, it was a revenge against his cousin, Bolapiek, you see. But of course, he didn't realize the bigger significance of the step he has taken.
Yeah, and the arrest of Pio Yukwan, was he a suspect or what?
Well, Pio Yukwan was the head of the bodyguards.
That's it.
He was the head of the bodyguard, and he had gone to the village that night, the night the man was killed, and there was no guards left. Those people just walked into the room. Yeah, so that was the suspicion, that why this is a negligence of duty, at least, if not conspiracy, at worst.
So
they arrested him for a while, and actually Pio was in Later on, he was put under open arrest, but he later on went to Malakal. When the agreement was made, Pio was already working with the veterinary department in Malakal. It was Gaitut. It was Gaitut who called him back and gave him 2 stars.
Yeah. The last there have been 2 questions about from 2 different people, and talking about things which have not been covered in the book. The book ends after the Addis Ababa Agreement, and these questions, the 2 questions which have been asked, are about after the Addis Ababa Agreement. So please, they are not within our review. What we are reviewing ends just after the signing of Addis Ababa Agreement. What happens after that event is not covered here. And just like other questions you have been asking.
Yeah, but of course, the Addis Ababa Agreement sealed the fate of both the SSLM and the Anya Nya.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The SSLM did not insist to be a political party, so it was over. And then the Anya Nya was absorbed into the Sudanese army. So they didn't have an independent existence at that time. So people stopped at the Addis Ababa Agreement. The Addis Ababa Agreement itself is not covered because it is covered elsewhere. We did not. In one of my books, I talk extensively about the Addis Ababa Agreement, the regional government, and all that. So it will be a repetition if we came and again talked about it here.
Yeah. So a lot of I think some readers will find the questions, quotations, especially derived from the interviews. I don't know whether you did some of those interviews, or some of them you did them, and others must have done those, carried out those interviews. And some of them may sound, they may raise more questions than answers. Yeah, for example, Paula Welleroy is said to have been born near Bor in 1936. As far as I know, he was from Duk, the other Duk.
Yeah, but this is what he means by near Bor. Actually, most of the interviews with the Anya Nya leaders were done by the professor in 1965, 66, when he was teaching at Makerere. So most of these interviews, except the ones in Upper Nile and those of Allison, Magaya, and Lago, and most of those were done by Estos Makal, because he had personal friendship with most of them. So when he talks of near Bor, I think it is Duke that he has in mind. Yeah.
And that he was born in 1936 and went to Attar. So if that information is corroborated with the dates of Attar was opened in 1946, so there is a gap of 10 years between the time he was born and the time he went to Attar, meaning he went to Attar at the age of probably, those days it was not easy to...
They say they went at 46, or he went to Attar.
He was born in... It is said he went to Attar, which I don't even know. And again...
but he might have gone before you.
No. It's the question of the date. The school was opened in 1946.
Yeah.
And he was born in 1936. 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years would mean...
But then did he say in the book that he went in 1946?
Oh, well, definitely.
Because Attar opened 46, okay. But it became continuous after that. So he might have gone 50, 50-something, 60.
I see.
It is possible.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. The other thing from the quotes, there is somebody who quoted several times, but I'm not going to mention his name. I couldn't rely on whatever he said. Well, that is too much to condemn everything. Because we had a situation that person came to Juba claiming to have a PhD from one of the universities in Australia and something PhD in another country, and he was going to be appointed as Vice Chancellor of University of Juba those days. But later on, when people went to counter-check the claims, he had none of those. So I began to say, okay, if that could be, how truthful could the institution? Yes. Yeah, that raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, the responsibility of that information lies with the professor. He's the one who,
yeah, that's possible. Yeah,
who interviewed most of them. I know who you are referring to, but
it's okay. That's good.
These were information from the professor.
Yeah. Now, without denying the viewers the right to ask questions, it should not be me alone asking all the time. There is this dearth of information about the South. Documents about the South are not even in the country. And we continue, like this book has been possible because, as you said in the introduction, that you discovered these documents from Akol, and you saw the value in them. Because, of course, the writing on Anya Nya has been it's not many people have written, especially those who were very close to the sources. Now, we will continue with information about us not available. And most of the people, like in Anya Nya, they have all gone, nearly all of them. Very few are alive. And that is a real national problem. The sources about ourselves not available. And if it is available, it is very far from home. Mostly Durham Archives is one of the most reliable source. And many people don't have access to that except those who are using online approach. What do you advise that, especially we have the National Archives, and there are a lot of people ready to assist in having it a reliable center of information. And the documents we have, and somebody told me recently that some of the documents about the SPLM have been eaten by ants somewhere in eastern Equatoria. What do we do to preserve our history in archives? Again, missing.
Yeah, I think it's issue of networks again.
Yeah, I'm hearing you now. You are talking about the archive. What can we do? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Just at the level of
when I was in Juba when I was in Juba in 2014, there was a
It's 1832.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying that in 2014, somebody who was working on archives took me to a visit because I insisted to see what they were doing. And they took me to a place where it was a building and some rooms, and then a lot of packed, files and some documents. The kind of documents that you used to see in the local government offices in the past, the reports of the inspectors and so on. So I think there's something being done about the archive. The problem, what he said, is that the government is not giving too much attention to it. So if people can really revive that, if it is dead, or if it is there, then it should be revitalized. It is the one that needs more revitalization than the politics. See? It's very important that that project is promoted. If the government cannot do it until people can really do it on a self-help basis.
Yeah, thank you.
But there's no alternative. There is no alternative to keeping our archives than to keep them ourselves.
That's right.
Also, the building should be designed in such a way that can preserve the documents, like the one in Khartoum here. They have now really made a very modern design. The old one you knew is not the one now. That is the archive here.
Thanks. Ajadeng, I will answer you for a while. Yeah, to add that, I think a personal piece of advice from somebody making research on the SPLM. Asked me one time to give them permission for documents. If you remember the newsletter, we used to
release, the one you used to issue in Addis.
Exactly. Now somebody stumbled on copies, about 8 copies, of which I don't have even a copy. Completely. And then he said, can I take them? Can I ask you take authority from you? And then there was this question of who is the copyright holder? SPLM, myself. I said, well, I'm not the copyright holder. And they argued with, and then they went and consulted the authorities. They said, well, for the time being, I should be considered to be the copyright holder.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, if that's the situation, I have no problem. You take copies, do whatever you want to do with them. He said, we are going to deposit them with the Durham archives.
Okay.
And then they would take copies, and then I would get my copy.
All right. After all, they were meant to be public anyway, so anybody would have kept his own copy.
Exactly.
They were public documents.
The head of archives at Durham gave me a piece of advice, which I am passing to everybody listening now. The person said, look, anybody with a document like this, they can give them to the archives. Anybody inside South Sudan with such a document must deposit that with the National Archives of South Sudan.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how they care about our own records?
Than ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they know the meaning of it. They know the meaning of it. Yeah.
Exactly. That anybody with such documents inside South Sudan should take them to National Archives in Juba rather than sending them to them. And I would So please, anybody with very important document which has a public value should send them to Juba, wherever you are. I remain with
this place. This place we are talking about.
Yeah. So this is one of the contribution we can make as individuals, as citizens. Yeah.
I used to have many of those. The problem is that when all these movements from place to place and under difficult conditions, led to the scattering of documents. You cannot remember of it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. We lost a lot when we were in Ethiopia, although we sent some of them to the border, but I think from there they also got lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody Ajadeng was asking a question about the difference between Anya Nya and the SPLM. Now, before I transfer this to Dr. Lam, first of all, this is an opportunity for me as somebody who writes from time to time. There is nothing, you have not mentioned this, there is nothing known as Anya Nya 1. You have only Anya Nya.
Yeah.
And then you have Anya Nya 2.
Yeah, that's right.
When you say Anya Nya 1 and Anya Nya 2, it's like you have Queen Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth II. But with our history, we had Anya Nya and Anya Nya 2.
Yeah, precisely. Precisely.
Yeah. So there's nothing known as Anya Nya 1. So they come with your explanation about the question
is a misnomer, actually. It's a misnomer to talk of Anya Nya 1, because by the time they were formed, they didn't know there would be Anya Nya 2. They named themselves Anya Nya 1.
That's right.
Yeah. The terminology is very important. It's very important.
It is. That's right.
To talk about what is the difference, in fact, is like, when we talked of Taurid before, we showed that the connection between the Taurid mutiny and the Anya Nya, it was not direct. But it was the impact of the Taurid that made people to think of rising, isn't it? The spirit of what happened in Taurid, lit the light in the hearts of the Southerners that, they need to do something like it in order to rise. So you had the Anya Nya afterwards. It was not directly Anya Nya, it was called the freedom fighters.
Yeah.
In Upper Nile or Daidor, mostly the newer terminology. The army of the bush. So the name Anya Nya came later on when the people have contact with the Equatoria and other parts of it. So that one is you cannot say that this has no relationship with 1955.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw your pictures disappearing. I'm saying that the SPLA is a continuation of the Anya Nya in one way or the other. The most direct one was that it came out as the grievances, of what was happening to the Anya Nya. You see, the question of transferring the Anya Nya units to the north was the basis on which the soldiers were mobilized, if you remember. Even the mutiny in Bor, if it were not a question of being transferred to the north, it might not have gained the momentum it did, you see. So you can say that the origin of the SPLA is in the Anya Nya itself, when it was integrated into the Sudanese army, and then there was an attempt to see that they are dissolved into the mainstream army, and so on. That one is a correct connection between the Anya Nya and the SPLA. The other connection, which is that most of the initial personnel, the officers, the soldiers in 104, 105, they were from Anya Nya. The officers who led the SPLA, John Garang, Carbino, William Nguyen, Salva Kiir, these people had a history in Anya Nya, you see. So it is a continuation of Anya Nya. Although in the manifesto, and this is one of the things that had always been controversial in the SPLA, the role of the Anya Nya, which is as defined in the manifesto, was not taken good by everybody, you know, because people thought that it was slighting the role of the Anya Nya when it was being seen as it was a jobist movement concerned about jobs and titles, you know.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. But it is the two are they are a continuation of each other.
That's
like
right.
any struggle, it must have some roots in the past.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah. Any more questions? And mainly about the book, not even the answers were just given are part of the book.
Mm.
Yeah. Boliko Akol, those who formed 1955, like Lagu talk about as Engineer One. Well, we don't really need to argue about this. It is a common sense we are using.
Mm-hmm.
It is true that it was Nyanya one, in the sense that there was a Nyanya there, and then there was second Nyanya. But in normal terminology.
And what is SPLA? Is it a Nyanya 3 or what? Like if you are numbering.
Yeah. And then another previous comment was that why do you deny that there were two civil wars in Sudan? There have been two civil wars. The one spearheaded by Nyanya and the one with the SPLM. I mean, civil war is war within the country, within itself, not with another country. So the one of Anyanya was a war between the government of Sudan and the rebels of Anyanya. The same with the Anyanya 2. Then the Anyanya 2, by the way, did not reach the level of a civil war. It was idle for a while.
It was acts of guerrilla warfare. I mean, action against the government. Government. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ambushes
and they did not occupy. Yeah. And still,
it didn't take.
Lual Bangot is asking who was General Tafeng. Tafeng, was he in the? Yeah, I think he mentioned that before. I think you must have just come. You must have just joined us. Doctor, can you provide him with the background to the immediate Tafeng?
Yeah, immediate Tafeng actually was, I think, the first Southern officer in the Sudan Defense Force and in the Equatorial Corps, which replaced the army at that time. Equatorial Corps, by the way, had 5 companies. 2 of them were in Torid area, one in Juba, one in Malakal, and one in Wau. And that's why the mutiny happened in Torid, because it had 2 companies there, as opposed to one in other places. Tafeng was arrested just before the mutiny. When he went to Juba, he was sent from Torid for some logistics. He was arrested in Juba for suspicion that he may be part of what was going underground at that time, that there was some action being prepared and so on. Then he was transferred to Port Sudan prison, where he stayed for a while. And then later on, there were an occasion where there was amnesty for some of them, so they were released. And immediately, as soon as they were released, he went and joined the Anya Nya, first in Eastern Equatoria, and then later on he became the commander-in-chief of the Anya Nya. Actually, when Lago was made the chief of staff, he was replacing Tafeng, but Tafeng went higher in the hierarchy. So he played a very big role in the army, and then later on he was assisted by Ali Batala, who was another veteran involved in the Tuareg mutiny. In the book, you will find a lot of reference to Tafeng.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. David Amol. Yeah. Yeah, I think that the question may be relevant, although we are strictly about the book. It's Dictor, just read it, and if you think you can answer
the question
it.
about the lessons. Yeah, actually, it is dealt with in the last chapter. The question of lessons. What do we learn from the Anya Nya?
Yeah.
The Anya Nya, the first lesson is the self-reliance. You cannot fail to see that from the very beginning when people were collecting money to go and buy guns. People were collecting food from the population. So the self-reliance was something that was embedded in the Anya Nya, and it started with that. And what was really a big motivator for people to go ahead, despite the fact that people didn't have the logistics. In the SPLA, we started big with too many guns, too many things, food, and so on. So even the guns in the Anya Nya, one gun was shared by 7 to 10 people. So self-reliance is number one lesson that people need to appreciate in the Anya Nya. The second lesson, which is negative, is that they attempted not to have an ideology. And in the world that was, by that time, it was a bipolar world. It was the era of the Cold War, where the smaller states were to benefit from the contradictions between the big two camps, the Eastern and the Southern, and the Western blocks. It was a big mistake not to have tried to identify it with the Eastern bloc, which was more likely to help them than the Western bloc, without losing much of their independence. The second point is a question of localism. Localism as reflected in so many governments that has been formed. Those governments really, yes, it has a history. The history that the politicians at the background of politics, and they were not contemplating from the beginning that they will get involved in the army struggle. So later on, when they became part of the army struggle, they were thinking of using the same methods of political activities. And that's why there were so many governments. That one was divisive in the sense that it trickled down to the units, and there were some clashes, in fact, between units on the basis of this supports this supports that. Although it was not widespread, but it happened. Even if you get the question of what was happening in Eastern Equatoria, the conferences that were being held, and so on. Yeah, these are examples of what could happen. Of course, the antithesis of that, which was too much to the extreme, in my view, was what Lago did in trying to, in the unity of the Anya Nya. Lago completely tried to obliterate any political role, you see, in the movement. You see, and that is why when the talks started, he had to look for the other intellectuals who were in in the neighboring countries, mostly Kampala. There was a Kampala group, and the people who were in the Congo, and his representatives abroad, those of Mading Digarang, those of Lawrence Wolwol. In fact, these were the people who were running the talks. And his body Mondiri, whom they have shunned for a long while, for being accused of being a communist, became the head of the delegation. You see. So these are some of the lessons that people needed to learn from. Of course, the SPLM made it too extreme, in the sense that everybody was made now to be military. You see, yeah, we out of the experience that were there in the Anya Nya of too many factions.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody had asked a question before about the relationship between Joseph Lagu and Frederick Magot.
Yeah, Magot was one of his assistants. Frederick Barain Magot was one of his assistants. And in fact, they were ironically, they started the same background. Frederick was accepted in veterinary science at the university, but then he left it and went to the military college. I think he was in the 3rd or the 4th batch. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think he was a bit ahead of Lagu.
Yeah, he's far ahead of Lagu.
Yeah, I think he was nearer to Samuel Abujon.
To Samuel Abujon, that's right.
Yeah.
And when he was out of the army, he took up some business, mostly in the Rumbek area. So the relationship between them was good. I think it wasn't that bad. It wasn't like the relationship between Lagu and Tafeng.
Yes,
but there is something mysterious here, which I did not raise in the book, but I have been wondering about. When Lagu became the Major General in the absorption, he promoted nobody to be brigadier and had 3 colonels. You see, he didn't have a brigadier who would have followed him, and many people thought that the Frederick Barain Magot should have become a brigadier at that time. Then the Abujon and Emmanuel Abur continue as the colonels. This is one comment. The other one was Joseph Akwon, actually, who was killed just while the talks were going on in Addis Ababa, was favored by Lagu more than Magot. Although Joseph Akwon joined at a later date, Joseph Akwon, in fact, was an activist in Ethiopia. And when Paul Nyong'oro went into problems in Fashala, that's where the Anuak went and brought him to take over from Paul Nyong'oro. These may be undercurrents, but what is in the open is that the relationships were okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The questions there, what is that question?
Seeking alliance with national leaders of Africa's orientations from other regions in Sudan, or did it limit its possible politics only the then Southern Sudan? Well, actually, the call for separation, I think, cut off many of these organizations in the north. This is one. The second thing is that there were not many of them at that time anyway. The activities were mostly in the Nuba Mountains, and the village are very far away. Darfur was very crowded by the fact that the influence of the Umma party was too strong there. But Philip Abbas tried to work together with Anya Nya, and they did not reject him.
Mhm. Yeah. Philip Abbas Bush was a very radical man. I remember there was a time when I interviewed him in 1980. He said when they were trying to, I think that Juba incident,
Juba Airport.
yeah, airport,
Yeah, in
and he admitted
July
that,
1977.
yeah, he said he was behind it. And I said, what was the plan? He said they were expecting some military support from a neighboring country,
Yeah.
which would fly in weapons and all this. And I said, okay, after that, what would you do? He said, we're going to take over the country. And to me, it sounded reckless. But of course, that was the type of his. He was a very militant in his attitude.
Mm.
And he was the one time, of course, you knew he was a church man, but he said one time he wrote to John Garang telling him, they say you are a communist. I don't mind even if you are red as blood. I will follow you as long as this is going to bring liberation. This was Philip Bush. And a lot of people shied away from his politics because you mentioned actually in the book, which is very important for the readers, that the coup that brought Nimeri to power they were
Yeah,
planning their own.
they were planning their own also.
Yeah.
So Nimeri coup went ahead before this.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were planning a parallel coup.
I have a feeling, this is my private feeling, that if that thing took place, it would have been very, very bloody, and it would have not been accepted by the establishment. And being one based on race, I think it was going to be a disaster.
But you never convinced Philip Abbas, about the futility of coups. I had a lot of discussions with him. Yeah. And in fact, in that other book, which is with the AWB, I found him administering oath to Yusuf Kua and Abdelaziz in his house, and I was near Shar Arbain, the intersection of Shar Arbain and Shar al Arda. So this same oath, when the coup fails, the one of 84, it was being related in details by those who were arrested, the soldiers who were arrested. So I knew that this must be true, because I heard it with my own ears and saw it with my own eyes. So when I was doubting whether it was a coup really staged by Philip Abbas Gobuch in 1984. But when the witnesses were being, brought to tell their stories, they related that oath. You see, so Philip Abbas, God bless his soul, was determined to make a coup. Even Edward Lino, the late Edward Lino, was telling me that when he was planning in 1985 to make a coup, and he told Edward about it, and he had a lot of confidence in Edward that he showed him even the list of the Revolutionary Council. So Edward told him, but Father, why don't we put the Northerners there? I know these people have been there for 50 years. Well, Edward told him, but you need to cover the eyes of the people in the first initial days, because these are the critical days. So the coups for him are something that he will never compromise about.
Yes, right. Yeah. Anybody else with a question, or do we have time for Amulat?
Actually, I will have to go to the church because we here.
Yeah.
We join church after others have done their services, so we start at about 1:30.
Yeah. Yeah. Pray for the country. Yeah. And
somebody was asking about what about Lago, whether Lago under pressure. This is about the Addis Ababa agreement now. It could have been leadership before the rushed into a negotiation with the Khartoum regime. No, it was not under pressure to make the talks. But conditions at that time made it possible for any peace talks to be carried out. First of all, Nimeri, of course, has exhausted all the political spectrum in the Sudan. You know, he started with the communists. He hit the right, those of Umma Party, the DUP, the Muslim Brothers. He hit them all. But then in 1971, that was the last group before, that is the communists. That was very, what you can call a game changer. In 1971, that was the time when he now had to shift from the Eastern Bloc to the Western Bloc. And the Western Bloc now dictated conditions. If Nimeri is to be accepted by them, he must have to resolve the issue of South Sudan. By then, the question of refugees has come up. In 1971, you remember even those of Peter Garquat went to Geneva to discuss the issue of the refugees. So the pressure came from the West on Nimeri. And Nimeri also felt vulnerable in the North. He had no ally, political ally, to rely on in the North. So now we thought this is the time to win over the Southerners for him to stay in power. So in fact, most of the pressure was on the North rather than on Lago. But Lago, of course, the churches told him that, look, now the window has opened for the talks to be meaningful. So you should not shun it. You should not refuse to talk. And they accepted. There was a few people who didn't want the talks at all. They said there is no basis of that. And then as long as Khartoum is not going to discuss separation of the South, why do we waste our time? But the secret talks started as early as 1971. The one asking the question is talking about rushing to the talks. The talks took a long time. First it started with Barbara Hack of the Labour Party, who was a friend of Joseph Garang. And then later on, when he showed his colors, because the Communist Party has always thought that Anya Nya was an imperialist plot to invade Sudan from the back door. You see? So that one made Meding de Garang angry, and he stopped any connection between the two, because it was Meding de Garang as a representative of the Anya Nya or SSLM in London, who was dealing with Barbara Hack and Garang. Garang used to go to London for these meetings. So that one died a little. Then later on, after the coup, it was revived, because the Communist Party was seen as a bloc against the agreement, because they gave conditions as to what kind of agreement they want. So afterwards, then the secret talks began with Lawrence Woolworth again, and then until there were a meeting actually in Addis before the one of November. That was the talks began in November 1971. So there were a lot of contacts in between. There's the World Council of Churches, the All Africa Council of Churches, and our Sudan Council of Churches. They were all involved, and they were the one moving in between. So it was not a rush. It took time, and Lago was not pressured very much. Yeah, if you consider being talked to as a pressure is okay, but the real pressure was on Khartoum And Khartoum also felt that they were vulnerable. They didn't have the military, the political base. So Southerners were an important, and in fact, their judgment was right when the agreement was made. Many coups that happened in Khartoum were foiled by Southerners, whether 1975 or 1976. Those of Carbino were in the palace as guards to Nimeri.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll give you time to go and see. Matiangarang, could you organize with Peter and so that you can discuss that question with Dr. Lam privately, because it is also outside the ambit of our conversation. Yeah, to add also to your answer before we sign off, you remember when during the press conference held by Dr. Mansour Khalid, who was one of the members of the Sudan government delegation to Addis Ababa, that when he was asked, why did you sign an agreement with Anya Nya when they did not present a military threat? They were unable to defeat the Sudan government, Sudan armed forces. Mansour Khalid said, yes, they were not a real threat, militarily or even. But from the moral point of view, everywhere we went into Black Africa, anywhere in Africa, they were asking, why are you oppressing our brothers? So we had also to put into consideration this question, whether Anya Nya was a military force or not. The whole thing was we were not like in the rest of Africa, meaning Black Africa, because they felt that their brothers in South Sudan were being oppressed. So that Nimero had his own pressures, not the other way around. Yeah. So I think all of you, the viewers, thank you very much for your patience and also listening, accepting my advice that we should confine our discussion and conversation to the topic at hand rather than other issues. All of us would like to discuss those issues, but everything must come. When we used to be students, we used to have what they call essay writing. When you were given a topic and you went and wrote something else, they would say off point. So we didn't want to go off point. Maybe we could look for another forum where we could discuss foreign current affairs. There will be no problem. If it is this topic, X and Y, there is no reason, there is no person to be told, no, your question is not in place. But please bear with us. That is the way we do it. It's just according to the topic at hand. We are very, very grateful to Dr. Lam Akol for his time, giving us this valuable information. Anya Nya is part of our history. It did a lot. Despite having not captured any town, it laid the foundation of what we have achieved today. With that, everything begins with a spark. And this is a subject we really need to, as individuals, as members of a country which got independence through armed struggle, people should be grateful to Anya Nya. And we need to understand the problems it went through. It was a spark. So it is relevant. Please get a copy and you will enjoy it. These days, there are very few books which interest me, but this one really took my time. I spent very good hours reading it, reminding me of things which I might have forgotten and learning new things. So please get a copy, read, and possible next time you can even ask him, send him a private, establish private communication with him. And Peter, as usual, you are the linchpin of all this. This is a good job. And unfortunately, the interruption with the communication has discouraged some of our viewers. And we hope next time we have another conversation, we will be 100% clear, no interruption. And thank you very much. And go and pray for us at church.
Well, thank you very much, Atem and Peter. Keep up the good job. You know, you have been doing wonderfully well, and people are appreciating your efforts. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's okay now.
All right. All the best. Yeah.
Time for books, 'cause they nourish just like water, holding secrets and lessons in place to be handed to our sons and daughters. Oh, in between the pages, amazing stories handed down through the ages, designed to nurture and to change lives. Yes, to change lives. That are just behind, they'd be lost without their supporters. Oh, in between the pages, amazing stories handed down through the ages, designed to nurture and to change lives. Yes, to change lives.
African World Books.
Those maybe.
Historia ya Afrika ni nani ataandika? Dar es Salaam tuko Kasto, Nairobi tuko Basto, Juba tupate mikutano, ni Kampala tuko mpangoni, yeah. Mading deng jaduong male gogi wati yogo mano jendi kumobe chinua chabe gogi baburito male babukito mabe vitabu vyetu Afrika tuvisome vitabu vyetu Afrika tuvisomeni Susana Olio. Kwagaranyo, kwagaranyo, kwagaranyo. Lam Akol. Nakusoma na mapozi. Nakusoma natokwa na machozi. Machozi, yeah. Sina la kupaira wimbo na makofi. Makofi wewe. Makofi. Makofi wewe. Vitabu vyetu Afrika, vitabu vyetu Afrika tuvisome. Vitabu vyetu Afrika, vitabu vyetu Afrika. Tuvisome. Tuvisome.
Let us teach our children our history and make them understand their roots and culture, because they're tomorrow's leaders and the backbone of the community. To all our thoughts out there, constantly finding new ways and discovering new stories about us and our old way of life. Asanteni sana.
Dar es Salaam tuko Kasto, Nairobi tuko Basto, Juba tupate mikutano, Kampala tuko mpangoni, nakusoma na mapozi. Nakusoma natokwa na machozi. Machozi, yeah. Sina la kupaira wimbo na makofi. Makofi wewe. Vitabu vyetu Afrika, vitabu vyetu Afrika tuvisome. Vitabu vyetu Afrika, vitabu vyetu Afrika. Tuvisome. Tuvisome. Ya Afrika, ni nani ataandika?
Today, open fields can be heard, beaming with life and a hope for the days to come, celebrating life given to liberate our country from oppression. Lasting a memory, soul, sweat, blood, and tears shed for the peace to reign in our land. And no, it wasn't in vain. Let the people sing, let the people dance, let the drums play, let the sound be loud, let the birds say what cannot be heard. A cry for peace to heal this land. Oh, heal this land. The struggle of a young nation, a vision raised by the late Dr. John Garang, fallen heroes, kilos of torture endured to make South Sudan home. We cannot let that go. We cannot stand and watch. We cannot go back to war, not anymore. Not go back to war, not stand back and war. We cannot let our heroes stand in the grave. A day to lessen a memory, soul, sweat, blood, and tears shed for the peace to reign in our land. And no, it wasn't in vain. Let the people sing, let the people dance, let the drums play, let the sound be loud, let the birds say what cannot be heard. A cry for peace to heal this land. Oh, heal this land.
Africa Wild Book stands with a vision to educate, empower, and cement a peaceful foundation. encouraging veterans to share memoirs, pen to paper, to have a culture of reading, research, and debates, learning from the past to forge a future. Let our children grow up in peace. Let our families know no war. Let us celebrate our martyr day in the independence and freedom that we now have.
There is history and culture between the covers of a book. We'll find what has been and what could come each time that we look. Elders, raise your pens and take a stand. Your ink brings life to South Sudan. If you'll make your mark for those to come, our generations all can join as one. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth. There are tears from the eyes of our nation. We fear for our youth. Information is lost when oral culture is what we choose. But Africa, world books, knows that we must take a stand. That only history leads us and liberates South Sudan. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth. Encourage the aging generation who fought for South Sudan to write their memoirs so the youth will all understand that our nation is young, but our history's richer than gold. That our people are strong and our stories are worth being told. Let's read, break out the books between the lines, finding outlooks and stories of all those who came before you. Feed your brain with knowledge gained from those who lived to liberate South Sudan and left us all with their truth. Let's read, break out the